This woman is Alberta Christine Williams King. She is the matriarch of the King legacy and the King dynasty. She was undoubtedly one of the most influential women of the 20th century. She reigned and was quite powerful during the 1920s through the early 1970s, a time in history before the internet, before cell phones, but still a time where a mother calls for justice. Yet, her calls went unanswered.
Today we'll shine light on the tragic case of Alberta Christine Williams King. Atlanta, Georgia, often called the cradle of the civil rights movement, a city where tradition met change and where the fight for justice carved its path in history. By the 1970s, Atlanta stood at a crossroads, embodying both progress and pain. New growth brought opportunities and promise, yet the scars of segregation and inequality still cut deep, leaving many Black communities trapped in the shadows of poverty. Yet still, Atlanta thrived as a center of Black excellence. Its politics, culture, education, and music inspired generations. A city where possibility and resilience lived side by side with struggle. Atlanta was a place where leaders emerged, where churches stood as anchors of strength and symbols of faith. From the pulpits of Atlanta, words of hope traveled the nation, and hymns of freedom became the soundtrack of a movement. Alberta Christine Williams was born on September 13, 1903 in Atlanta, Georgia. The only child of Reverend Adam Daniel Williams and Jenny Celeste Park Williams. Her father was the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, a cornerstone of the Sweet Auburn community, located at 407 Auburn Avenue, a street once held by Fortune magazine as the richest Negro street in America. Growing up as the pastor's daughter, Alberta's life was deeply shaped by the church, grounded in faith and dedicated to community service. She carried those Christian values with her into every part of her life. In 1920, Alberta met a young minister named Michael King, and the two would begin dating. Both were committed to continuing their education, and by 1924, Alberta earned her teaching certificate from Hampton Normal and Industrial Institute, known today as Hampton University, before beginning her career as a teacher in Atlanta's local schools. On November 25, 1926, Alberta Williams married Michael King at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Since the local school board prohibited married women from teaching, Alberta was forced to give up her career. The young couple settled on the second floor of her parents' home, where they began raising their family. Their first child, Willie Christine King, was born in 1927, followed by Michael King Jr. in 1929 and Alfred Daniel King in 1930. After Alberta's father, Reverend Adam Daniel Williams, passed away in 1931, her husband, Reverend Michael King Sr., stepped into his role as pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Alberta, meanwhile, shaped the church in her own way. In 1932, she founded and directed the Ebenezer Choir, while also continuing her education at Marsh Brown College. Just a few years later, during a trip to Germany in 1934, Michael King Sr. was deeply moved by the story and teachings of Martin Luther, a German priest and the Protestant reformer. When he returned to Atlanta, he changed both his own name and that of his eldest son, who was 5 years old at the time, to Martin Luther King Sr. and Martin Luther King Jr. With active roles in civic and religious organizations, Alberta's work also extended beyond the church.
Mrs. King was an active member of the NAACP. She was involved with the Young Women's Christian Association and the Women's International League for Peace. Alberta Bunch King served as the organist for Ebenezer Church from 1932 until 1972.
She understood the importance of a beautiful home, a beautiful life, a supportive wife, but she never allowed that to prevent all of the desires of her heart. She was a well-rounded, fully rounded lady.
And in 1938, she earned her bachelor's degree. But above all, Alberta devoted herself to motherhood. She raised her children to value education, to face discrimination with dignity, and to never see themselves as inferior. Through love, faith, and resilience, Alberta laid the foundation for the legacy her family would carry into the world. Alberta was often described as soft-spoken, reserved, and someone who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Yet during the 1950s and 1960s, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, she played a quiet but steady role in supporting her son, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She helped organize rallies and stood faithfully behind him as his leadership and influence grew.
She always said to me, you must never feel that you are less than anybody else. You must always feel that you are somebody, and you must feel that you are as good as anybody else. And of course, this came up with me in spite of the fact that I still confronted the system of segregation every day.
Is that a violent conflict in your life? If you really believed your mother and yet the system around you suggested that this wasn't true, it must have set up some sort of strain.
Yes, I think so. As I look back over those early days, I did have something of an inattention. On the one hand, my mother taught me that I should feel a sense of somebodyness. On the other hand, I had to go out and face the system, which stared me in the face every day saying, you are less than, you are not equal to. So this was a real tension within.
Reflecting on her presence in his life, Dr. King once wrote, "My mother, Alberta Williams King, was behind the scenes setting forth those motherly cares, the lack of which leaves a missing link in life." During this era, Dr. King also shared the pulpit with his father, Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., and his brother, Reverend Alfred Daniel King, as co-pastors of Ebenezer Baptist Church, while Alberta continued her own service as choir director. But in 1968, tragedy struck. On April 4th, civil rights leader and minister Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, where he had gone to lead a march in support of the sanitation workers. He was just 39 years old. Alberta, though extremely devastated, became a source of strength for her family in the wake of her son's assassination. Yet heartbreak would strike again the following year on July 21st, when her youngest son, civil rights activist and minister Alfred Daniel King, suspiciously drowned in his own pool. He was just 38 years old. For Alberta, the loss of both sons were unbearable, but still, with unwavering strength and faith, and as the King family's matriarch, she continued to carry the weight of her family's legacy. On Sunday morning, June 30th, 1974, nearly 400 worshipers gathered at Ebenezer Baptist Church for what began as a typical service. Amongst them was a young black man in a tan suit, who many assumed was simply a visitor. At around 11 a.m., as the service began, Alberta King sat at the organ playing the Lord's Prayer, when suddenly chaos erupted. The young man, later identified as 23-year-old Marcus Wayne Chenault, leaped to his feet shouting, "You must stop this. You are serving a false god." From the balcony, the chief usher of the church recalled hearing the commotion and seeing Marcus leap from the Amen corner into the pulpit, brandishing 2 pistols. As panic filled the church, what followed was a nightmare. For the next 90 minutes, Marcus opened fire. Bullets ripped through the air until both weapons were empty. Witnesses remember him yelling, "I'm taking over this morning, and I'm going to kill everyone in here." When Marcus attempted to reload, Alberta's grandson Derek and other brave members of the congregation rushed forward and restrained him, bringing the rampage to an end. In the aftermath of the gunfire, members of the congregation looked around. Several people were injured, and next to the organ was Alberta lying on the floor, clutching her face. During the violent attack, Alberta, church deacon Edward Borkin, church members Jimmy Mitchell, and others had been struck by bullets and were rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital. Edward Borkin, 69 years old, was pronounced deceased on arrival. Church member Jimmy Mitchell was shot in the neck, however she survived her injuries.
Because I tried to get on the seat myself, but I knew he had already shot me when I tried to get under the seat. But what I thought, if he shot me once and he was right there by me, he might shoot me again. So I was trying to get under the seat to keep from getting killed.
Alberta was gravely wounded by a gunshot to the right side of her face. She was described as barely alive when she reached the hospital. Moments later, Alberta Williams King would succumb to her injuries. She was 70 years old. The loss was unimaginable. 6 years after the assassination of her eldest son, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and only 5 years after the sudden passing of her youngest son, Reverend Alfred Daniel King, Alberta Christine Williams King was taken by violence. Reflecting on that day, her daughter Christine King Ferris wrote in her 2009 memoir titled "Through It All," "That Sunday was without question the worst day of my life. I thought I had made it through the worst days of my life. I was wrong." 23-year-old Marcus Wayne Chenault, who was subdued by members of the congregation, was arrested immediately for the shooting. Marcus Wayne Chenault was born June 30th, 1951 in Winchester, Kentucky. His parents, Marcus and Henderly Chenault, were devout Baptists who regularly attended church, and for much of his youth, Marcus appeared to have lived a relatively normal life. The family later moved to Ohio, where he attended college for a time before dropping out. In 1973, Marcus encountered Hananiah Israel, born Stephen Holloman, a self-proclaimed spiritual teacher and Black Hebrew Israelite preacher. Holloman rejected the New Testament, denounced Black civil rights leaders, and cast mainstream Black ministers as corrupt and deceptive. Now considering Holloman his mentor, Marcus embraced these radical teachings and soon became consumed by hatred for Christianity. Desperate for recognition and acceptance, he compiled a list of prominent Black ministers and civil rights figures as potential targets. Just 2 weeks before the shooting, Marcus intended to assassinate Reverend Jesse Jackson in Chicago, but he abandoned the plan at the last minute for reasons unknown. On June 29, 1974, he boarded a bus bound for Atlanta, carrying 2 pistols stolen from his father. The next morning, June 30th, on his birthday, he walked into Ebenezer Baptist Church. His original target, he later admitted, had been Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., but when he saw Alberta at the organ, he decided to shoot her instead because she was the nearest to him. Marcus would go on to say his actions was because he believed Black ministers were a menace to Black people. Although his attorneys pleaded insanity, The court ruled him to be competent to stand trial. Psychiatrists testified that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, yet on September 12, 1974, the jury found him guilty of first-degree unaliving. When Martin Luther King Sr. asked him directly why he unalived his wife, Marcus replied, "Because she was a Christian, and all Christians are my enemies." He was sentenced to be unalived by the electric chair, but the King family, firm in their opposition to capital punishment, advocated against his execution. In 1995, a judge commuted his sentence to life in prison. Only months later, on August 3rd, Marcus suffered a stroke. And on August 19, 1995, Marcus Wayne Chenault passed away at the age of 44. In 1980, the home of Alberta Christine and Martin Luther King Sr. was designated for preservation as part of the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park. Community programs and memorial events at the national park titled Mother's Day Letter Writing, inspired by Martin Luther King Jr.'s letters to his mother, highlighting her enduring influence. A dedicated scholarship at Spelman College that support music majors is named in Alberta's memory. Martin Luther King Sr. passed away on November 11, 1984, at the age of 84. Willie Christine King Ferris passed away on June 29, 2023, at the age of 95. Alberta Williams King was one of those voices, steady, faithful, and unwavering. Her story reminds us that true legacies are not built on fame, but on love, sacrifice, and quiet strength. Though her name is not often spoken, without her, the story of the King family could never be told. To those who knew her, she was described as the hidden force behind her crusading sons and husband, and rightly so. Much like a gem, her strength was often unseen, but her value was beyond measure. Though her life ended in tragedy, her legacy continues to shine. So to Alberta Christine Williams King, and to so many women like her, thank you. No story is forgotten, no voice should go unheard. Rest in peace to Miss Alberta, Reverend Martin Sr., Miss Christine, Dr. Martin Jr., and Reverend Alfred King. Sending my deepest condolences and prayers to the family and friends. Until the next time, thank you for watching Shades of Crime. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember to pray. God's listening.